Our movie starts today in Mexico with Brian, who wakes up from sleep. Brian is a lonely engineer who was preparing breakfast when he saw a picture of his wife, who disappeared for unknown reasons. After that, he left his house to go for a run to improve his physical fitness. It turns out that Brian used to be a teacher in the martial art of Kyokushin, but he quit because he became too busy with his engineering job. Oscar is a young neighbor of Brian who always used to spy on him from a distance, trying to learn the secrets of martial arts from him. However, in the end, Brian ignored him and went to work because his job was important and everyone depended on him. As for Oscar, he resumed his high school studies as he was in his final year and wanted to pass to move on to university. Being an outcast at school, he noticed that there was a gang of criminals observing him from a distance and trying to corner him. But Oscar outsmarted them and escaped at full speed. At that time, Brian was having a meal at a nearby restaurant and saw Oscar running away from the gang. He became extremely angry. Afterwards, Oscar went to borrow money from his grandmother to buy food for his younger siblings because his parents had passed away. At night, the gang members stormed Oscar's house, and the gang leader told him that he had disrespected them and that if it weren't for his older brother being a member of the gang, they would have killed him. Reluctantly, Oscar apologized and gave the gang leader the money he had taken from his grandmother. The next day, Oscar started observing Brian from a distance. But this time, Brian surprised him and invited him to train with him. Brian took this initiative because he saw the gang chasing Oscar and decided to teach him the secrets of Kyokushin martial arts for self-defense. From the beginning of the training, Oscar's incredible talent emerged as he quickly learned all the fighting techniques, transforming into a ruthless and merciless fighter who could break the bones of anyone standing in his way. After a short period of time, Oscar's self-confidence increased, and he was no longer afraid of the gang members like before. Meanwhile, Brian received recognition from his colleagues at work for being a smart engineer. After that, he decided to take Oscar to work with him because Oscar was planning to join the engineering college after successfully completing high school. One day, while Brian was training Oscar to improve his reflexes in order to defend against enemy attacks, Oscar accidentally saw a picture of Brian's wife. He quickly put it away before Brian entered the house and refused to ask him about her. Later, he told Brian that he wanted to participate in a martial arts championship. Brian then told him that Kyokushin is a deadly martial art and should only be used for self-defense. At that moment, the gang reappeared, but this time, Hector was with them. Hector is Oscar's older brother. When Hector saw Oscar training with Brian, he asked him to stay away from Brian because he might be an undercover officer. Oscar apologized to Brian for his brother's words, and Brian asked him to take care of himself. The next day, Oscar went to the martial arts club to participate in the training. However, Marisol, the owner's daughter, told him that he was only 17 years old and needed a guardian's consent to participate. This greatly excited Oscar, and he eagerly looked forward to obtaining the consent. In the night, Oscar told his brother Hector that he wanted to continue training with Brian so that he could join the club. However, Hector refused and told him that he would stay with him in the gang. After that, Oscar and his brother went to an illegal fighting ring where Hector started betting with his friend from the gang and lost because there was a strong fighter in the ring whom nobody could defeat. At that moment, Oscar entered the ring without warning and told the referee that he would challenge this strong fighter. Everyone was surprised because Oscar was still a young and seemingly weak guy. However, at the beginning of the fight, Oscar used the secret Kyokushin defense technique he learned from Brian and was able to easily dominate his opponent until he found the perfect opportunity to knock him out with a quick and powerful blow. Hector felt great happiness because his little brother emerged victorious and helped him win the bet against his friends. After that, we moved to Peru. While playing golf with his friends, Peru was surprised when one of his followers sent him a video of Oscar fighting. Peru was very impressed by Oscar's skills and decided to meet him in any way possible. Then, Peru went to the most dangerous prison in the world, where he met Clapin and gave him the video. Clapin is a dangerous criminal, and when he saw Oscar's fighting style, he said that Brian must have trained him because Brian is the only person in the world who knows this fighting style. After that, Peru sent his followers to get rid of Brian because they had an old rivalry, and it was the reason Brian ended up in prison. On a new day, Oscar and his brother Hector went to meet Brian, where Hector asked him to train his brother Oscar so that he could participate in martial arts tournaments and win a lot of money from bets. But Brian refused and told him that the art of Kyokushin is only meant for self-defense. Oscar was upset because his trainer refused to train him. During the conversation between Brian and Oscar, Hector went to Brian's car and tried to steal it. Brian asked him to stay within his limits, but Hector threatened him with a weapon and said, "You may be a strong fighter, but you can't protect yourself from bullets." At that moment, Brian pretended to be weak and skillfully drew his weapon to defend himself against Hector. After that, he asked him to surrender and stay away from his house and his followers because if they returned, he would eliminate all of them. Likewise, he told Oscar that he couldn't train him because he caused him a lot of problems, along with his brother. When Oscar and the gang left, Brian felt extreme anger because his only student who would participate in illegal tournaments might misuse the secrets he learned from him and use them for evil. After Brian refused to train Oscar, his brother Hector took him to join the martial arts club. When he was about to fill out the membership forms, two unknown identical twin men suddenly entered the club and asked Oscar about Brian's whereabouts. Oscar sensed that they were villains and replied that he knew nothing about him. At that moment, Hector realized that they were armed and could be hired killers. Due to this commotion, the trainer, who was Marisol's father, asked them to calm down and stay away from trouble so as not to get kicked out of the club. Oscar became worried and asked Marisol to come with him because Brian didn't want to talk to him or his brother. Marisol agreed, and when they arrived and Marisol learned everything, she regretted Oscar's actions and asked Brian to reconcile with him and talk to him. Brian agreed to her request, and that's when Oscar informed him that there were two twin men looking for him. Brian felt a great shock and asked Hector, Marisol, and Oscar to hide in his house as quickly as possible. However, it was in vain because there was a sniper already prepared without their knowledge, who killed all the gang members before they could escape. Fortunately, Brian managed to protect Marisol, Oscar, and Hector and hide them in his house. Afterwards, everyone was surprised by what was happening and asked Brian what was exactly going on. Brian told them that he used to be a police officer and had arrested a dangerous criminal named Clepine who had hidden in Mexico to stay away from the authorities. But when Clepine learned my whereabouts, he sent his followers to kill me. Brian also insisted that the young ones stay where they are until he gets rid of the twins. At the beginning of the battle, Brian used iron arrows to avoid loud noises like gunshots. After killing one of the twins, he threatened the second twin and pressured him to confess who sent him. But the twins' reaction was quick, and he managed to engage in a fight with Brian. Initially, Brian used Kyokushin karate, while his opponent used boxing. However, Brian emerged victorious in the end because he knew all the opponent's weaknesses. He then threatened to burn him with gasoline, and when he asked about Clepine's whereabouts, the twin insulted Brian and set himself on fire to avoid revealing his secrets. In the end, Brian apologized to Hector, Oscar, and Marisol for what happened and told them that he would leave the city to protect them from the hired assassins who were after him. He then opened a secret trench for the young ones to safely escape. As Brian entered the trench, he began to tell the young ones about his past and informed them that after capturing the criminal Clepine, his gang kidnapped his wife and tortured her, which forced him to risk his life and use all his combat skills to save her. However, the problem was that he had to escape from America and disappear from sight because if he stayed with his wife, they might kidnap her again or harm her. After Brian finished his story and reached the end of the tunnel, he gave his gun to Hector and asked him to protect his brother and Marisol. With a heavy heart, Brian bid farewell to Oscar and asked him to continue training in martial arts because he was a talented young man. At night, there were several police cars parked in front of Brian's house, so when they called for him, Brian went to inspect the surveillance cameras and discovered that they were criminals working for Clepine, disguised as police officers. Brian moved stealthily and began to fight against them. The criminals were shocked by Brian's speed and intelligence, especially when he sprayed them with fire extinguisher water. Brian is a clever engineer and a creator of many traps for his enemies. After a long fight, Brian easily eliminated all the criminals. However, he left two of them alive and told them to inform Clepine that he would return to seek revenge for his actions. Clepine was furious and told his assistant, Pero, that they must eliminate Brian by any means necessary because he knows all their secrets, and his hands could be their downfall. At this time, Hector had already brought Oscar and Marisol to the city. He told Oscar to continue training because he had become a strong fighter and would participate in fighting tournaments soon. Then he continued on his way to meet his gang. However, when he arrived, he was surprised to be betrayed by one of Clepine's associates. When he asked about Brian's whereabouts, Hector insulted him and refused to answer because Brian had saved him and his brother Oscar. The criminal then took Hector hostage and threatened to kill him unless he revealed Brian's location. But Hector remained steadfast and did not utter a word, even though he was in great pain. Suddenly, Brian appeared and killed one of the criminals. The leader took Hector hostage and demanded that Brian surrender himself or else he would kill him. Now Brian used a brilliant plan with his weapon and killed the criminal who was threatening Hector. Afterward, he escaped from the scene because he had run out of bullets, and all the criminals took out their swords and chased him. Brian ran at full speed, and the criminals thought he was scared, but in reality, he lured them to the top of the mountain. There, he separated them and began to defeat them one by one. After that, Hector returned and freed him from his restraints, also giving him his gun. He asked him to come so they could get the gang out of the city. At that time, Oscar and Marisol went to Brian's house to check on him, but Oscar was surprised to find fighters wearing armored clothing. They attacked him fiercely, and he used his martial arts skills to defend himself. Then an unidentified fighter attacked Oscar, and the strange thing was that he used the same secret fighting style that Brian had invented. But over time, Oscar managed to gain control over him until his opponent surrendered. He revealed his name as Eric and told Oscar that he was one of Brian's former students, which is why he knew the secret fighting technique. Oscar believed him and stopped the fight. Initially, Eric asked Oscar about Brian's whereabouts, but Oscar, being smart, refused to answer because Eric could be lying and wanting to harm Brian. At this point, Eric sensed that Oscar was hiding something from him and said that he would take him and Marisol to his secret hideout to ask them some questions. On the way, Oscar noticed that they were heading into the desert. Eric told them that he had changed his mind and would take them to his secret hideout to question them. At that moment, Oscar secretly called his brother Hector, and luckily, Hector was in the car next to Brian. When Brian learned everything from Oscar, he revealed that Eric was indeed his former student, but he had betrayed him and joined the Clapine gang. Brian was able to locate Oscar's position using GPS, and he and Hector set off to rescue him. When Eric heard Oscar talking on the phone, he took it from him and threw it out the window. At that moment, Hector noticed that they had lost the signal and became very angry because he was concerned about his younger brother. Brian reassured him and told him not to worry and focus on what's ahead. As for Oscar, a smart idea came to his mind, and he pretended to faint to make the criminal take him out of the car for fresh air. He observed the building number next to him and memorized it without Eric noticing. After that, Eric took Oscar and Marisol to a very luxurious house and warned Oscar that if he tried to escape, he would harm Marisol. Oscar had no choice but to listen to Eric and went with him to meet Valdez. Valdez is a very dangerous gangster who was sitting with Peru, Clapine's assistant. Their meeting was to find out Brian's whereabouts because Brian had caused them to lose millions of dollars in the past. They also asked Oscar to send a message to his brother Hector to inform them about the information they wanted, and at this time, Brian met with Hector and his gang, and they agreed to go and rescue Oscar and Marisol from the clutches of the criminals. During their meeting, they suddenly received a message from Oscar. In this message, the building number that Oscar had memorized was written. Brian used GPS to pinpoint the exact location. However, the foolish Eric did not notice Oscar's trick and thought he was sending the message to his brother. But the unexpected misfortune was that another rival gang attacked Valdez's hideout. Eric and his men were forced to defend the place until Valdez took advantage of the chaos and killed Peru because he hated Clapine and wanted to take control of the illegal trade for himself. During this chaos, Brian and Hector, along with the rest of the gang members, stormed the entire place. At the beginning of the battle, Hector joined forces with Brian and managed to eliminate a large group of criminals with the help of the gang members. However, Brian gave Hector a powerful weapon because the pistol was weak and its bullets couldn't penetrate the armored clothing. After that, Brian took an iron shield to avoid bullets and ordered Hector to hide inside the building to protect him and snipe anyone who attacked. He continued fighting with great skill. Eric and Valdez felt terror as their men were being defeated. Oscar took advantage of the guards' distracted attention and attacked him, rendering him unconscious with lightning-fast martial arts moves. Eric witnessed this and attacked Oscar, but Oscar managed to disarm Eric and fought him fiercely until he gained control over him. At that moment, Eric, the scoundrel, tried to retrieve his weapon, but Marisol intervened at the last moment and shot him in the leg. Brian succeeded in breaking through all the defenses, and when he reached Oscar and Marisol, he found Eric injured and restrained. Brian congratulated Oscar on his bravery and asked him to take Marisol and escape. Suddenly, Valdez appeared with a grenade launcher, wanting to destroy anything in his path. At that moment, Hector emerged from his hiding place and killed Valdez at the last moment. Brian smiled and thanked him for his skills and for saving them. In the night, the police arrived and interrogated Hector to learn about everything that had happened in the area. While Brian was checking on Oscar and Marisol, his wife suddenly appeared from a distance in a car. Of course, Brian couldn't believe the happy and unexpected surprise. Both of them felt great happiness. After a short period, Clapine, the criminal, was captured and returned to solitary confinement in prison along with the guards. There, the guards removed their masks, revealing that it was a trap set by Brian to get revenge on Clapine for all his actions and to show him that he was still weak.